Okay, we'll start with this, our continued recap of this past weekend's action. South of the border in Mexico, the women's reigning WBC Super Bantamweight champion Yamileth Mercado was in action opposite the ring Chiwandire
of Zimbabwe.
The then WBC interim champion and mandatory challenger to Yamileth Mercado's WBC title.
Yami managed to win a points decision.
I've noticed a change in Yamileth Mercado the last couple of fights ever since she shared the ring with Amanda Serrano up there at featherweight, and Jackie Nava, one of the finest female fighters that Mexico has ever produced, took her under her wing and helped her prepare for that fight. I've noticed a change in Yamileth fight by fight.
And it's a change for the better. She's evolving as a fighter.
A young fighter, a young champion, where Yamileth Mercado was more prone to brawling and trading punches mid-range to inside a few fights ago. She's doing more moving,
more sharpshooting.
She's making a conscious effort to being more of a boxer, less of a brawler, less of a puncher.
Even though she can punch and she can still take a punch.
Yamileth Mercado seems to have taken a liking to movement and counter-punching, boxing.
She's not a brawler anymore.
She's really settled into that base style opposite the ring Chiwandire, who was the aggressor for the most part.
Tried to be.
The more statuesque fighter in the fight with the longer extremities, the longer levers, stepping into those straight shots from the outside coming in, looking to close the distance on Yami.
This fight with Chiwandire was a far cry from the Alejandra Guzman fight and the Angelica Rascon fight we saw a few fights ago, a few fights later.
Yamileth Mercado is more of a mover and more of a sniper.
Added some extra tools to her toolbox.
She doesn't just sell out and trade punches anymore. She's more efficient, more economic.
Defensively responsible.
The sport of boxing being as punishing a sport as it is, the hurt business as they call it, surely you can see the virtue.
The benefits of being a more defensively responsible fighter. Adding years to a fighter's career by not taking punches they don't need to take.
Mitigating the damage and mitigating the number of exchanges they find themselves in.
Like Yami was doing.
Yami, who is now a more well-rounded fighter than she was some fights ago. Some fights later, she won a points decision against her mandatory challenger.
Beat her on the cards.
By creating space and walking Chiwandire into punches.
Staying on the move.
Not selling out, only 1 and 2 punches at a time. Very efficient, economic.
Not an action fight.
It was a boxing match, and Yamileth Mercado kept it a boxing match.
I want to say that both fighters have vastly improved. Not just Yamileth Mercado, but Chiwandire as well. I don't think every other super bantamweight out there will be as fortunate as Yamileth Mercado was, as capable, as formidable opposite the ring because Kurukwashe is a very tall super bantamweight, a very long one with speed. Power.
She is lacking in some areas. Her best punches are her straight punches, the jab and the straight.
She's got to work on disguising her power a bit.
Jab and the straight can become monotonous and predictable after a while. Kurukwashe is going to have to go back to the drawing board and work on disguising her punches and feinting.
Cutting off the ring also.
Limiting the number of exits a moving target, like a Yamileth Mercado, can use to their advantage.
Though she has improved over time, she gave that to which Yamileth Mercado had to work around.
Giving up as much ground as she gave up, essentially retreating from the action in order to mitigate it.
She ain't doing that for no reason.
She wasn't. Kurukwashe is fast and strong, and you don't want to get hit with unnecessary shots from a puncher like Kurukwashe.
There are a good number of unbeaten up-and-comers that campaign in the women's super bantamweight division. Bree Howling, who I talked about in my previous video, Ellie Scottney,
Ramla Ali, who was in action not that long ago, Argentinia's own Nazarena Romero.
She's a good fighter too, strong puncher.
Proliferation of talent at 122 pounds makes it one of the deeper divisions in the sport of women's boxing.
Yami Mercado successfully defended her title yesterday south of the border. Yami, who is one of 4 reigning champions in the women's super bantamweight division.
Yami's got the WBC title, Mayerlin Rivas of Venezuela. She's got the WBA, Shernika Johnson. She's still got the IBF.
Deborah Dionysus, she's got the WBO.
She's set to defend it soon. Opposite the ring, former WBO champion of France, Sigaline Lafarve. her mandatory challenger. There's a lot going on, anywhere in between 118 and 122 pounds.
Very deep talent pool.
As Yamileth Mercado remains the super bantamweight division's WBC champion, one of 4 champions at the weight. Congratulations to her on her latest successful title defense. In men's welterweight news, you may have heard this past week that Conor Benn has returned to the number 7 spot in the WBC's welterweight rank standings. Conor Benn may never appear a clean fighter,
Not in the eyes of his critics.
but the show must go on, and for Conor Benn, it's going to. He has been officially reinstated in the World Boxing Council's rankings.
His lurch back into the limelight.
After the WBC concluded its investigation last month into the embattled welterweight's 2 positive drug tests for a banned performance-enhancing substance, in which it suggested that Benn had unknowingly ingested a performance-enhancing substance due to an elevated consumption of eggs. The organization stated that it would reinstate the controversial fighter into its welterweight rankings. The sanctioning body has now made good on that promise.
He's back.
For better or worse, he is, and there's all sorts of talk floating around about who Conor Benn might fight next. There's talk of a Pacquiao fight, Pacquiao negotiations, and Brook himself has thrown his name into the hat.
The show must go on.
In its updated rankings published on Wednesday, the WBC formally pinned the British puncher at number 7, in between Abel Ramos at number 6 and Gvozdyk Kavaliauskas at number 8. The champion of the organization's weight class is Errol Spence Jr., while its number 1 contender is Keith Thurman. Benn acknowledged the news on his Instagram, writing, "Coming for that number 1 spot." Benn continues to be absent from the rankings of other major sanctioning bodies, including the WBO, the WBA, and the IBF. Benn was previously ranked in the top 5 of each organization. Benn was previously ranked at number 5 with the WBC.
He was. He's at number 7 now.
He's lost some ground after it was revealed last year that Benn had not only failed 1 drug test, but another for the same substance, clomiphene. The WBC decided to drop him from its rankings. The WBC justified its ruling on the grounds that Benn's positive tests were in violation of the statutes in its clean boxing program, which is a testing protocol that the WBC requires for all fighters ranked within the top 15 across all weight classes. The testing is administered by the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, a highly respected third-party testing agency that also conducted the 2 tests that showed the presence of clomiphene in Benn's body. Benn recently contended that clomiphene was never in his body and has instead blamed laboratory procedures.
We talked about that here on the channel. Some of the concerns that Benn raised about how his samples were handled.
Clomiphene is used by women to treat infertility, but when it's used in men, it is known to boost testosterone levels. It is on the prohibited list by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Although Benn is currently still being investigated by the British Boxing Board of Control and the United Kingdom Anti-Doping, he has been making the media rounds as of late, maintaining his innocence and clamoring for a big fight. Benn has stated he is not concerned about the prospect of not fighting in his homeland for the foreseeable future. BoxingScene.com understands Benn will return to the ring on June 3rd in Abu Dhabi in a card promoted by Eddie Hearn's Matchroom. 8th division champion Manny Pacquiao has been floated as a potential opponent.
That's not going to go over well with anybody, you know.
You can get people to watch, you understand. You can definitely get eyes on a fight like that, but if Conor Benn were to win...
If they didn't like him before, they're going to hate him now.
And that has its uses, you know, being the bad guy, playing the heel in the sport of boxing. The thing is that Conor Benn's not playing. He's vehemently asserting his innocence.
You know, he went on a Piers Morgan show, and I said it before. He didn't do himself any favors going on there, but he didn't convince anybody. When I heard he was going to be on there, I expected a more detailed and elaborate explanation, an expanded conversation on what concerns he already raised, and we didn't get that.
All we got were reassurances from Conor Benn that he is innocent in the absence of actual evidence, actual proof. Eddie Hearn...
He's saying that the testing process is going to be more rigorous than any fight that has ever existed.
The testing process for Conor Benn's next fight, which could be against Manny Pacquiao, could be against Brook.
It could be.
One thing that makes me laugh is people who say, I mean, look at Conor Benn. I mean, he went from getting dropped stopped by a guy who was 7-3 to becoming an absolute killer, Hearn said on the DAZN Boxing show. Well, no one was saying he was a killer. Everyone was saying he was just fighting bums. So when he stopped South African welterweight Chris Van Heerden and knocked out American welterweight Chris Algieri, now everyone is making out that he was superhuman. But at the time, he was overrated. Algieri was a light welterweight who was finished. Van Heerden hadn't boxed in a year and a half. He was shot. You've got pros coming out saying it was obvious that Ben was doping. Do me a favor.
I interpreted those fights at the time as developmental fights for Conor Benn, developmental fights against familiar faces that had been in there, against other familiar faces. That's what those fights were to me.
You go in there, you knock out a Chris Algieri or a Chris Van Heerden, that's hardly a smoking gun that you're doping.
Well, no, not that in and of itself, but there are the 2 positive VADA tests to be addressed.
You know, whoever Conor Benn fights next, the testing process is going to be more rigorous than any fight that has ever existed, right? Let's see if all of a sudden, if there's a dip in his performance, and he don't punch as hard. Absolutely ridiculous, you know? I cannot believe the relentlessness of some people with agendas, but I've never seen so many people so passionate about the subject all of a sudden.
They want to nail Eddie Hearn to the cross over this thing because he's still promoting Conor Benn's fights.
But I don't see any of these bleeding hearts so concerned with doping in the sport, nailing Lou DiBella to the cross. Lou DiBella, who not only helped to promote Jean Pascal's last fight, but Lucas Brown's last fight this past weekend, and both of those guys have popped hot for banned substances.
Lucas Brown tested positive for banned substances on 2 separate occasions. John Pascal...
He only tested positive once, but it was for 4 banned substances. 4!
That's a lot.
Manny Pacquiao wants the fight, Hearn said. It's an expensive fight. It's a great fight. It's a great fight. It's an expensive fight, and we're in talks with a number of countries to stage that fight at the moment. Conor wants that.
And it would be a high-profile fight, but it wouldn't do much in terms of legitimizing Conor Benn's stake as one of the best welterweights in the world. Being honest with you, I'd rather see Conor Benn versus Mean Machine.
Conor Benn versus Egidijus Kavaliauskas, or maybe Florian Marku, and what about Michael McKinson?
Southpaw, pure boxer, crafty guy.
My eyes, those are more legitimate contests than trying to take on a 44-year-old Manny Pacquiao. Manny, God bless him, in spite of his profile, what else does he have to offer the sport at this point?
And you could definitely get people to watch that fight, but if Conor Benn wins, once the fight is over, what does it really do for him?
If he wins, they're going to hate him for it. Because of the clomiphene, because he's fighting a 44-year-old Manny Pacquiao. You'd be better off putting him in there with Kell Brock.
There are some people that would criticize him for that.
If you think this clomiphene stuff was a PR nightmare for Conor Benn, just imagine if he knocks out a 44-year-old Manny Pacquiao.
They're going to want to burn him at the stake.
I don't know that Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn should go through with that fight. And finally, in men's light heavyweight news, former WBC champion Alexander Gvozdyk versus Ricard Bolotniks is set for May 6th on the undercard of Canelo versus Reinstatement.
Just like that, Alexander Gvozdyk is back in the mix of everything, or he could be, if he beats Ricard Bolotniks.
Boxing's bona fide superstar Canelo Alvarez will defend his undisputed super middleweight title against WBO mandatory challenger John Ryder at the 50,000 capacity Akron Stadium in Guadalajara, Mexico, on Saturday, May 6th, live on DAZN pay-per-view in the United States and Canada as part of the DAZN subscription in 190 territories. Promoter Eddie Hearn has confirmed in an interview with Boxing Social that former WBC light heavyweight champion Ukraine's Alexander Gvozdyk will face Latvia's Ricard Bolotniks on the Canelo vs. Ryder undercard.
A few weeks ago, Alexander Gvozdyk spoke to Steve Kim and detailed why it was he returned to the sport of boxing.
In so many words, what the former champion stated was he had been spending a lot of time in his native Ukraine, and he was affected by the war, the Russian invasion.
He lost a lot.
And just like that, he's back. Bolotniks was supposed to face the United Kingdom's Craig Spider Richards on the April 1st Anthony Joshua Jermaine Franklin undercard in a reschedule of their November 6th fight, which fell apart at the 11th hour due to an illness from Richards. But the Londoner has suffered a hand injury, ruling him out of a fight with Bolotniks for the second time. Lion Bolotniks instead gets an opportunity on another major card against Gvozdyk, who was at one point considered a top 3 in the division. Gvozdyk has only laced up the gloves once in a professional ring since his 10th round stoppage defeat at the hands of Artur Beterbiev in October of 2019. A 6th round decision win in February against a journeyman. Gvozdyk has teamed up with Canelo's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, which has assisted him in landing a slot on the undercard.
A happenstance.
One of those things to where he was just in the right place at the right time, rubbing elbows with the right people, sporting a professional record of 18 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 14 knockouts, having only ever been knocked out once in 19 professional bouts.
I didn't expect Alexander Gvozdyk to fight someone this solid for at least one more fight.
The Latvian Lion, Ricard Bolotniks, is a capable gatekeeper who can upset the apple cart for you if you're not careful, sporting a professional record of 19 wins with 6 losses, 1 draw, 8 knockouts, having been knocked out 4 times.
4 times in 26 professional contests.
And as stated, I already knew that Alexander Gvozdyk was on the comeback trail, but I didn't expect that he would be fighting an opponent this solid for at least one more fight.
Bolotniks is a scrapper.
He's gone up against 4 unbeaten fighters in his last 6 fights, and of the 4, he's beaten 3.
Joshua Buatsi was one among them close to 2 years ago in August of 2021.
He knocked out Ricard Bolotniks in the 11th round of their fight. Ricard, he has seen action at least once since then in April of last year.
Opposite the ring, an opponent whose name I cannot pronounce.
So let's not waste each other's time on that. In a nutshell, Ricard is coming off a win.
As is Alexander Gvozdyk, who was in action earlier this year in February opposite the ring veteran journeyman Josue Obando.
And that was a 6th-rounder. Alexander Gvozdyk won a points decision. It does seem like a bit of a leap from Josue Obando to Ricard Bolotniks.
You know, I remember in that Steve Kim interview with Alexander Gvozdyk ahead of the Josue Obando fight that, you know, he wanted to step things up, that if he came back, it wasn't to fight journeyman like Josue Obando. Fighting on a major card, a major show like Canelo versus Ryder.
It's a major opportunity. It's a step in the right direction, the direction of bigger fights for the former champion, who's a very spry 35 years old.
Especially when you consider that Artur Beterbiev, who beat Alexander some years ago in 2019, that guy's pushing 40. Alexander's actually several years younger than Artur, so it's not too late for Alexander to get things going.
It isn't. I think if he plays his cards right and he can make his way past Ricard Bolotniks, maybe Eddie Hearn and Matchroom will set him up with a Craig Richards fight in the United Kingdom.
Maybe.
Perhaps for more money, perhaps for a bigger purse than what he stands to make opposite the ring, Ricard Bolotniks.
That's a good little fight, if I'm being honest. The welcome addition to the Canelo versus Ryder card.
Alexander Gvozdyk was once ranked top 3 in this division. If he can get back to his old ways, get back to his former self, he should be able to make it through Ricard Bolotniks.